The 47th argument found on the website godisimaginary.com is entitled Contemplate Creation. As we come to the conclusion of these arguments, and we're almost finished, I only have a few more to go. As we come to the conclusion of these arguments, this one I find particularly fascinating and maybe even helpful in some ways. The argument basically goes like this. There are only two options to explain the complexity of the world. There's some confusion in the argument of terminology, but let me just follow it the way it's presented there. There are two options to explain the complexity of the world, we're told. One is that it spontaneously arose without intelligence. That's one way to account for the world. It spontaneously arose without intelligence. So the world as we see it with all of its complexity, human life and animal life and everything that's going on in the world, is an effect of forces that spontaneously arise. That is, they don't have any moving intelligent cause, but instead they simply are random or they are blind forces that arise without intelligent causality. And so intelligence is an accidental effect of a series of spontaneous natural causes that have produced this unintended effect. When I say unintended, if it were intended, it would be intelligent. The second option, the first option is that the world as we experience it in all of its complexity spontaneously arose without intelligence. The second option is that an intelligent creator is the reason for it. In other words, mind, and a supreme mind, a first mind, is the reason why complexity has arisen in the course of cosmic history. So we have two very starkly different answers to the question, what accounts for the world as we experience it? One account is the world of complexity and intelligence and everything else that we experience is the effect of spontaneous, unintelligent causes, and therefore unintelligence or matter and forces precede and are the cause of mind and intelligence and rationality and freedom. The other explanation is that the reason why the material world, the sensory world, has resulted in at least humans, at least one kind of intelligent being and free being, rational being, is because there's a rational cause that has directed the world to this end or to this goal. So those are, we're told, are two options that we have. The second, according to the argument, the second creates an impossibility. And the reason why it's impossible, that there is an intelligent creator that is the cause of the complexity of the world, is, we're told, and I'm quoting, the creator can't spring into existence if complexity requires intelligence. All right? The creator can't spring into existence if complexity requires intelligence. So the argument is basically this. If we have an intelligence that is the cause of the world and its complexity and all of that, then that intelligence itself must be explained by some prior intelligent cause that produced it. So the result then is that it's better to say that there are spontaneous, sort of natural causes that have produced the complexity of the world than to say that there's an intelligent first cause, because that only creates another problem. And the problem is that we've got to have another one beyond that one, or else we're arbitrary and we are being inconsistent. I would be inconsistent if I said, well, there's a first intelligence that is the cause of the complexity of the world, but that intelligence doesn't have a prior cause. It simply is. Why can't I just say that the world about us is the cause of the complexity of the world without there being any intelligent first? In other words, there's neither position is able to go back to a first without becoming inconsistent. Now, I would say in response to this that, first of all, the first option, that the world and all of its complexity arose spontaneously without intelligence, admits that complexity came to be. In other words, complexity is the result of a process, and therefore a reason is needed to explain how that came about. In other words, the point I'm trying to drive at here is that the first suggestion, that the world and all of its complexity arose spontaneously without the need of intelligence, acknowledges that there's an issue here. The issue is that a world that is changing and becoming, a world that produces complexity, creates a question. The question is, what accounts for that? The atheist, at least this one, says what accounts for the complexity of the world is a spontaneous, the word is undefined here, but presumably it means a non-rational, non-intelligent, non-free or volitional series of events. So the atheist takes the complexity of the world and says, all right, this is a question. How did this come to be? How did it come to be this way? It's a legitimate question. And the atheist takes the question and says, a spontaneous, irrational, or non-intending, rational, intelligent cause. So a material, blind, random, or undirected, unconscious process has produced consciousness, rationality, freedom, and so on. But what's crucial here, what's crucial to me, is the admission that the question is legitimate. In other words, the atheist here is not saying, who cares? Or it's not even a meaningful question to ask, what is the cause of the complexity of the world? The atheist recognizes that it is something that has come about through a process, and that inquiring into the causes of the process or the reasons for the process is a reasonable, rational, intelligent question. So the assumption is that there is an intelligible, meaningful answer that can be given to the question, why is there complexity? Why is there rationality? Why is there freedom? Why is there consciousness? These are questions that require or that point us to some type of rational explanation, some reasonable explanation. It just turns out that for the atheist, the explanation they give us is a question devoid of rationality, which is I think the crucial, really crucial point here, is that what the atheist proposes to us is that non-rationality, irrationality, or simply forces of nature, a spontaneous emergence of forces, are what explain our rationality and our quest to make sense out of these things. So the atheist is saying here implicitly that there is a reason for the complexity of the world, and the reason for it is an irrational explanation. That is, it's not rationality that produced this world as we see it. It was simply a spontaneous collection of forces that happened to exhibit or produce rationality. Now, what about the criticism of the second argument or second proposal, that an intelligent creator is the reason why there is a world like this? What I would point out to you here is that we as human beings experience reality in two ways. We experience it in terms of the natural world and its forces, and we also experience the world in terms of our own rational life, our own mental life. So I know the experience of taking matter and directing it to some type of purposeful goal. So for instance, right now I'm using an iPad to record this presentation. I have a rational series of intentions. I want to produce a presentation on these points, and so I'm taking the physical object in front of me, and I'm taking the power of communication and speech and sound and the body that I have. I'm using all of this to harness and direct all of those physical processes and objects to a specific intended goal. The specific intended goal is that I'm able to share this video with you. So I'm taking all of this matter and I'm directing it to this end or to this goal. So rationality or intellect is moving the matter in this direction. So I know the experience, as a human being, I know the experience of the material world, and I know the experience of rationality, of consciousness and of reason. And I'm able to take that consciousness and reason and direct the matter to some purposeful goal. The option that we're being presented here by the atheist is that when we're confronted with the complexity of the world, the realities of the world, we have two options. We have two things to choose from. We have our rationality, and we have the physical world around us. And we can draw two conclusions about the world. Either the world is the product of a supreme intelligence, that is taking the matter of the world and directing it so that it produces complex things like ourselves. Or we have the option of saying there is no first intelligence, that intelligence is the effect of matter, and in matter in motion, spontaneously arising for no ultimate reason except that it simply is. The one who believes in God or Creator says that actually the first reality is reason, is mind, is intelligence, is thought, is freedom. And reason, thought, intelligence, freedom, and so on have produced a world of matter, of changing things, and is directing them purposefully in to some goal. And that the reason why I can think and rationally reflect upon the world is because we are the product of a cause that we are emulating and that we are copying and reflecting in our thinking and our thought processes and our intending and our creations and so on. What about this problem of if you say there's a God or you say there's a first intelligence, what about it spontaneously arising itself? How can you avoid the problem if you say that there's a God? How can you avoid the problem, as is presented here, that the Creator didn't spring into existence? Are we just being arbitrary in saying that God didn't spring into existence, but that everything else has to spring into existence? And I would say here this is an oversight and a huge blind spot in the minds of atheists. It astonishes me, actually, and we see it here in this particular case. The argument is that the complexity of the world requires some explanation. The atheist acknowledges that there's something about the world in which we see its becomingness, we see it changing, we see it coming to be. And so we ask the question, what accounts for or explains the becoming of the world and the complexity of the world? We ask that question. The atheist acknowledges from the start that that's a meaningful question. The problem here is that the atheist assumes that because the question about the origin or the reason for the complexity of the world is a meaningful question, the atheist assumes that that question is meaningfully asked of every reality. And what I would argue is that that question is not meaningfully asked of the first intelligence. The first intelligence, if in fact the world is the effect of a supreme intelligent mind, a supremely intelligent reality, if the world is an effect of that reality, and that reality is properly first, then it has no origin beyond itself, it simply exists. The atheist assumes that if we acknowledge that the world needs an explanation, then God needs an explanation. No, the reason why the world needs an explanation is because it's coming to be, it's changing, it's undergoing process. If God is not coming to be, if God is not undergoing process, then the question of the origin of God or the reason for the existence of God is not to be located outside of himself. If God is self-existent, if he is the reason for his own being, if he's self-existent mind, if he always is and exists from himself, then there is no reason to ask of his origin. What the atheist does here is ask about the origin of the world, which I grant is a good question. The atheist has admitted it's a good question in the sense of what accounts for the world's becoming in the direction of complexity. The atheist admits that that's a good question. I say it's a good question too, but I say that when we ask that question of God, it's a bad question because the reasons why we would ask about the complexity of the world do not exist in relationship to God. It's like asking what is the cause of the uncaused reality, or what is the cause of the coming to be of the God who doesn't come to be. It's a contradictory question. It doesn't make sense. It shows that there's not an appreciation of what we mean by God in asking the question.